Hey, welcome back to Mission Creek Church's daily vlog. My name's Matt O'Connor. I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with me, but I'm filling in today for Rob as he is taking some time to prep for his sermon. And today, the vlog, the devotion, whatever you want to call it, is going to be from the book of Jeremiah. We're talking about fear today. Fear is in the human experience in our lives is a very strong motivator. In fact, I heard it said, paraphrasing here by John Piper. I'm sure again a guy many of you guys are familiar with, that a fear of something other than God is oftentimes a misplacement of fear. You could say fear of something greater than God, which obviously it doesn't make sense, but so often we fall into that trap that oftentimes is what leads us into disobedience. God says do this and we don't do it because we're afraid of something, and our fear of that something is greater than our fear for God. Now, I want to read from Jeremiah 1 here, and this is sort of building this story of God's plan for Jeremiah. In fact, we know that this, from the beginning of this chapter, that God's plan for Jeremiah predates Jeremiah's birth, starting here in Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. We're continuing here. Get more backstory on Jeremiah's initial lack of confidence in his ability. He goes on to say, then I said, alas, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak because I am a youth. But the Lord said to me, I do not say I am a youth, because everywhere I send you, you shall go, and all that I command you, you shall speak. So oftentimes we fall in that same trap of not only fear, but what was Jeremiah's fear there? He was fearful that his youth would be too great to overcome whatever challenge ahead of him, right? That he was too young to do God's bidding. And so often we fall into that same trap. And it might not be youth. It might be, I don't speak well enough. I don't know the Bible well enough. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too this. I'm too that. My socioeconomic background, my race, my whatever, isn't that of the person or the peoples that I'm potentially talking to. Maybe I'm not the right person for the job. And yet there's time and time again in the Bible, New Testament and Old Testament, where we see examples of people that did not fit the bill. You can see examples of Jews preaching to Gentiles, for example, right? Did not know their culture maybe as well, right? You can see examples of, for example, here, Jeremiah saying, I'm too young. God says, I'm bigger than that, right? So often we find excuses to maybe ignore, to disobey. But again, a lot of it goes back to maybe this fear that we won't be enough, when it's really not us that we should be counting on. We should be counting on God. But continuing here, I digress. Let's see here. Let's see here. So he says, do not say I am a youth. This is verse 7. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am a youth, because everywhere I send you, you shall go, and all that I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them. So again, signifying that there's some fear here by Jeremiah. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Continuing here, then the Lord stretched out his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have appointed you this day over the nations and over the kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. All right. So that's verse 4 through 10 here. And then I want to continue here towards the end of so long story short here, to paraphrase verse 15 through 15 and 16 here, basically laying out his plan for Jeremiah. He says specifically, for behold, I am calling all the families of the kingdoms of the north, declares the Lord, and they will come and they will set each one his throne at the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem, and against all its walls, round about, and against all the cities of Judah. I will pronounce my judgments on them concerning all their wickedness, whereby they have forsaken me and have offered sacrifices to other gods, and have worshipped the works of their own hands. So, like so many times in Israel or Judah's history, they've fallen into this trap of idolatry, of offering sacrifices or burning incense to other gods, and this trap of worshiping something their own hands have created. And many of these examples, it's statues made out of various materials and whatnot. And I think that same idolatry absolutely can happen in our own lives. Just takes a different form. I don't think too many of us are in the habit of creating a golden calf and worshiping it. It just takes a different form. But again, that's the plan that God has for Jeremiah, is to prophesy this to the people of Judah. And what does Jeremiah say initially? I'm afraid, I'm too young, etc. But God continues here. This is verse 17, again, chapter 1. Now gird up your loins and arise, and speak to them all which I command you. Do not be dismayed before them, or I will dismay you before them. Now, I can check here. This is just a Bible that's actually sitting here. New American Standard Bible. Another translation, NIV, would not be dismayed, but don't be afraid of them, or I'll make you terrified before them. Right? Don't be afraid of those that you're preaching to. Be afraid of me. Right? Now, behold, this is really the great part. I think my favorite part of this chapter here. Now, behold, I have made you today as a fortified city and as a pillar of iron and as walls of bronze against the whole land, to the kings of Judah, to its princes, to its priests, and to the people of the land. They will fight against you, but they will not overcome you, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. I mean, how great is that? There's so many. Occasionally, when we look through the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, sometimes there's this temptation to say, yeah, but God's not talking to me there. He was talking to Jeremiah. I'm certainly no Jeremiah. I'm no whatever, Ezekiel, or I'm no Job or whatever, right? That's not me. He's not talking to me there. And occasionally, there's some truth to that. God is not specifically probably calling us to go prophesy to the people of Judah or Jerusalem or whatever. He's there's some aspects that we can say, here in Minnesota that probably doesn't apply to us, but there's a lot of it in the sense that everywhere I send you, you shall go. This is verse 7. And all that I command you, you shall speak. I mean, I think that we can say reasonably that if God tells us to go somewhere, if he tells us to say something, that's true for us. And it's not just true for Jeremiah. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you. This idea here at the end of the chapter, now gird up your loins and arise, speak to them all which I command you. Do not be dismayed before them, or I will dismay you before them. Now behold, I have made you today as a fortified city and as a pillar of iron and as walls of bronze against the whole land, to the kings of Judah, to its princes, to its priests. We're talking the people in the upper levels of society, right? And to the people of the land, they will fight against you, but they will not overcome you, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. I mean, I think how much of that can be said about our own lives? And yet, what is stopping us from obeying what God has called us to do? Now, true, many of us may not have the same calling in the sense that this scale. Most of us are probably not prophets. Most of us may not live as large as maybe some of the prophets, some of the individuals in the Bible. But that doesn't make us any less, I guess, our mission any less important, if that makes sense. Yes, Paul, yes, the disciples, yes, the apostles, yes, the prophets all had very important missions. I mean, so important that they're written about in the Bible, right? And you might ask yourself, how could I ever match up? But the point of this is that you don't have to match. You don't have to be a prophet. You don't have to be one of the founding members of the church that ultimately is going to reach millions, billions over the next few thousand years, right? You don't have to live up to that. You have to live God's calling for your life. I mean, the fact of the matter is that I think a lot of Christian living is not always going to the extreme in the sense that I need to lay down all I'm doing right now and find the riskiest option. Example, go to an extremely hostile country, hostile to Christianity, and preach the gospel in the streets and just, I don't think that's necessarily the case for all of us, that we have to go out there and pick the riskiest option. Nor do I think that God's calling us all to do that. I think oftentimes the case is that God is calling us to reach those in our community, those friends of ours, those in our workplace, family members, our own family, our own children, spouse, etc., and shepherd them. So often God has called us to a much, how often is it that God gives us little things? We can all have the ministry of Billy Graham right off the bat. We start with little things before we're given more. And some of us may never have the ministry most of us won't have the ministry of a Billy Graham. And that doesn't make us, what's important is obedience. And so often it's fear, misplaced fear, that gets in the way of obedience. Ultimately, our fear should be of God. Our fear should be of the Lord, right? Don't fear those that can hurt your mortal body. Don't be afraid of those that may give you a funny look or may treat you differently or may choose to no longer be friends with you or whatever. Be afraid of God, right? Be afraid of your maker. Be afraid of the one that has commanded you to go to such and such a place and say such and such things, right? That's where our fear ultimately should be. And there's a lot of fear in this world today, right? In this world of the coronavirus. Yes, the coronavirus can be scary for a lot of people, but there's also a lot of other things that people are going through. Fear of isolation, fear of family members being sick, fear of loss of employment, fear of loss of income, fear of financial problems, etc. And that's probably just some of the big ones, right? It goes much deeper than that. But there's a bigger, our fear of God should outweigh any of that. And to maybe a non-believer, fear of God doesn't sound comforting, doesn't make sense. But when you're no longer held by the bounds of our fears outside of God, fears of what people will think of you, fears of what they can do to you, fears in the world, once you're no longer held by those bounds and your fear is of God, there is a peace, there is a comfort in that, right? And I think that's really important aspect of what God's trying to get across here to Jeremiah. But I think much of this can be paralleled to our own individual lives. So I hope you guys are hanging in there during this lock-in. Certainly, if you have prayers, we're here to pray for you. There's a lot of people with not a whole lot to do right now. So I hope you enjoyed today's vlog. Stay tuned tomorrow for Rob's message, and then next week we'll be back with the normal vlog format. Thanks to all of you for tuning in today, and God bless.